Hello everyone, my name is Yara, and today I'm going to be reviewing some books that I've read recently. We have a big variety here today. We got dystopian, we got witches, we got racism in publishing. I'm guessing you can figure out which book that is. We got YA, we got adult, we got middle grade, there's something here for everyone. The first book I have to talk about was honestly such a surprise. Not because I didn't think that it would be good, but because I pretty much solely read it because I thought the cover was beautiful. I was just scrolling through Hoopla looking for middle grade reads to read for Middle Grade Magic Readathon, which happened last October. And this cover just stood out to me. I was like, I don't even know what this is about, but I'm going to read it. And that is The Last Cuentista by Donna, Barba, Higuera. This is a middle grade dystopia novel that takes place in the not so distant future where an asteroid, Halley's Comet, is about to hit the Earth. We follow our main character, Petra, who was 12 years old, whose dream it is to be a storyteller just like her grandmother. When it becomes more and more imminent that Earth is going to be destroyed, select individuals are chosen to be sent to a new planet called Sagan, where they are going to continue the human race. And as Petra's parents are renowned botanists and geologists, Petra's family is chosen as one of the few that are able to go. They are boarded on a ship and put into these pods where they are going to sleep for 375 years until they land on Sagan. But Petra, once she wakes up, finds out that the new planet has been taken over by a group called the Collective, who are determined to eliminate every memory of Earth and of human society before Sagan. But while everyone has forgotten their lives and the stories of Earth, Petra is the only one who remembers. This book was absolutely fantastic. I saw that it was compared a lot to The Giver, like a modern day version of The Giver, and I would definitely echo that comparison. It introduces interesting questions about how we currently structure society and how we should structure society in a way that's very accessible to young kids and teens, but also doesn't dumb it down for them. And to that note, the book was honestly a lot darker than I was expecting. There were a lot of very suspenseful moments and a lot of decisions that I did not expect to see in a middle grade book, but I think were really important to the narrative. And there are also a lot of descriptions of botany and different science or medical terms that were pretty descriptive that I don't think I would have understood at that age, but I liked the fact that they weren't trying to dumb it down for kids. Obviously, everything is still age appropriate as it is in middle grade, but I just love the fact that it took its audience seriously. Going back to the comparison to The Giver, this is something that I think that if I ran a middle school classroom that I would teach in an English class. It's a really great jumping off point to talk about the ways that stories and history serve our society and why it is so important to cultivate them and preserve them. There was even a mention of artificial intelligence and its effect on the sterilization of art, which is really surprising because this book was published in 2021 before ChatGPT and all these AI art tools were really getting into prominence. There's a lot of ethical and moral considerations with the collective's goal of trying to equalize humanity and get rid of disparities, but in doing so, remove any sort of diversity or difference between people. It also touches on eugenics a little bit because the main character has a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which impacts her vision. And this obviously poses a problem in a society that is trying to perfect the human race. My feelings on the book overall are kind of summarized by this quote. I know stories can't always have happy endings, but if there are chances for us to do better, we have to say out loud the parts that hurt the most. So yes, 5 stars, highly recommend. I was going to say that it's very underrated, but I'm pretty sure this book won the Newbery Prize for middle grade. But it's not really talked about on the internet that much that I've seen. So anyways, just read it. It's really good. The next book I read was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which is a super popular book that I have very conflicting feelings about. Essentially, this is about an author named June Howard who has gotten a book published but isn't really doing that great in the publishing industry. She's kind of still struggling to break through in the industry. And she can't help but feel a little envious of Athena, her college friend, who is now a New York Times bestseller and is getting so many opportunities and all these best 30 under 30 lists. Like, she's thriving. However, when Athena dies by a very weird incident where June is the only witness, June decides to do the most unhinged thing ever and take Athena's unfinished manuscript about the contributions of the Chinese labor forces during World War I and edit it and submit it to her own publisher as her own work. Even more than that, June now decides to write as a more racially ambiguous name of Juniper Song, becoming enmeshed in a string of lies that end up making her become a New York Times bestselling author. But she can't escape the fear that someone might find out what she did, and with more and more time, there's more evidence that someone out there might know and might be out to take her down. The only other book that I've read by R.F. Kuang is Babel, which I reviewed in a previous recent reads video. And though I had some qualms with that book, I definitely loved it, enjoying it, and with time I've grown to even love it, and I really think about it all the time and all the questions that it poses, and that is something that I definitely left this book with as well. R.F. Kuang knows how to write an interesting story that poses interesting questions. Obviously, going into this book, you're kind of expecting this very scathing commentary on white fragility and the lengths people will go to defend a lie that they've created. There was definitely a commentary on cultural appropriation through this very satirical situation and this very unlikable main character. A really fascinating aspect of the story that I found was this idea of authenticity in storytelling and what it actually means to steal someone's story. So obviously we have this main narrative of June literally stealing Athena's story, literally taking her manuscript and publishing it as her own. But the book also posits some questions about the ethical responsibilities of people in the diaspora, writing about people on the mainland, or even the ethics and responsibilities of taking inspiration out of someone's story that you've heard. It's a pretty common thing for storytellers to say, like, oh, someone told them this story or they heard this story somewhere, and then they use that story for inspiration for their writing. But this book brings up the idea that these things can actually be exploitative, especially if these stories are told in private. What ended up being both a strength and a weakness for me in this book was its meta commentary on the book internet culture. As someone who is chronically online, it was definitely really funny and very entertaining to see how accurately R.F. Kuang portrayed like Twitter and TikTok and how internet discourse goes down whenever something happens in the book community. You can tell that she is a part of these communities, and that's why she could portray it so accurately. But sometimes it definitely did feel like it was a self-insert for the authors, because some of the things that were being discussed in this online discourse in the book were things that have actually been levied against or about R.F. Kuang, which kind of took me out of the story because it kind of felt like I could feel the author like hovering over my shoulder, and I could feel her actively writing the story, which is not something that you always want when you're reading a book. You want to be immersed in the character. And it also ends up just being a weird paradox where I think in order to fully appreciate the satire and the comedy that she is writing, you need to be immersed in these online spaces. But then if you are already in this environment, then this messaging isn't something that is new to you, or you aren't necessarily the target audience that this book may need to be targeting. Though I kind of speak too soon for that, because we literally had two situations in the past like 6 months that show that many people on book Twitter still need to get this message reinforced to them. I'm looking at you, Freydis Moon, and whoever that other person was, Kate Corain. Another problem that I encountered on just a more storytelling level was that the book kept kind of building up this string of lies, and I kept wondering, okay, like, how is this going to resolve? Where is this going? What is going to happen? Which is good. You want that suspense and that level of intrigue to keep growing. But this whole time I was like, dang, I really don't know how this is going to resolve in a way that satisfies me. And I was kind of right. I did find the ending a bit underwhelming. Without giving anything away, it did feel a little bit like a Scooby-Doo unveiling the mask situation, which to me was underwhelming because one of my favorite aspects of the book was developing that more psychological suspense as you see June become more and more paranoid about the lie that she built around herself. So overall, that's where it kind of landed for me. I feel like my thoughts were very complicated, very all over the place. I definitely liked the book. I definitely want to leave that as my final note. I think I was just expecting it to like change my worldview and change my life because it was very hyped up. And I don't think it did quite that, but I also do think that there's very much a place for this book in publishing, and I'm glad that people are reading it and that it is bringing up these discussions. What I do know is that I'm just going to keep reading R.F. Kuang because her mind is always turning. The wheels are always going in there. And I ended up giving Yellowface 3.5 stars. The next book I have is another middle grade novel, and that is Wtchlings by Claribel A. Ortgea. This was our group book for the Middle Grade Magic Readathon, again, back in October. I wasn't lying when I said I'm very behind on these recent reads. This takes place in a town called Ravenskill, where every year witchlings are placed into their covens in a black moon ceremony. Seven Salazar is our main character, who is 12 years old and is super excited to be placed into her coven, only to find out that on the day of the ceremony, she is not placed into any of them. She is placed into what is known as the spares. And this is devastating because without a coven, witchlings are unable to fully develop their powers as a witch, and now she's at risk of losing all of her magic. Desperate to get out of this fate, Seven decides to invoke the impossible task, which, if they complete, will allow the spares to fully initiate themselves as a coven and obtain their full powers as witches. The only problem is that no one ever in history has ever invoked or solved the impossible task, and if they don't solve it, they will die. That was a very grim ending on that synopsis, but trust me, this book is very lighthearted. It was such a cute book. It was very cozy. It was very contemporary style fantasy. Like, even though we were dealing with witches, the town and everything felt very contemporary. It definitely reads on the more younger side of middle grade, which I found to be very charming, but some people might not like how young it reads. But given that it read pretty young, I was so surprised with the thematic topics that this story brought up. We had a whole live show discussion about this book on Kara, Wild Book Garden's channel, where we went a lot in depth into all these topics. So if you want to hear more spoilery discussions, you can go there. But basically, we get this introduction of Seven as a spare, and spares are pretty much second-class citizens in this town. They are basically indentured servants. They have no autonomy and no financial freedom and are treated pretty horribly by the wealthier class. So we get this theme of classism, but there's also this underlying layer of themes of social justice and how history is often written or even rewritten by the oppressors. And there's also mentions of familial abuse in the story. I truly was not expecting this going in. From the description, I was expecting a very fun adventure full of hijinks and mystery, especially as a big core of the story is the three spares learning how to become friends and how to ally with each other to solve this task. And we definitely get that. It is a fun adventure. But I think what makes this book really stand out is these underlying themes that have a lot more depth to them. I was pretty torn on my final rating of this book simply because of something that happened at the end. Again, we talked about this in spoilery detail in the live show, and I don't want to give it away. But basically, I feel like it undermined all that good stuff that was being developed to have a bit more of a flashy ending. I think I still settled on 4 stars, but I'm very interested to see how what happened at the end is resolved in the second book, because I do believe there's a sequel. So we'll see how that plays out, but overall I thought it was a very solid read. The last book I have to talk about today is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which I read in anticipation of the movie that came out last November. I actually reread the entire Hunger Games trilogy because I realized it had been like 10 years since I reread it last, and I didn't remember pretty much anything, and I felt like I really needed to reread those to fully appreciate Ballad. And that was true, so I definitely recommend not going into Ballad unless The Hunger Games is pretty fresh in your mind. So if you didn't know, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a prequel to The Hunger Games set 70 years before, I believe, and we follow President Snow as he is in the capital and trying to rise up in the ranks. It is the year of the 10th Hunger Games, and he is a student at the academy, and they are all assigned a tribute from each of the districts to mentor in the games. And he is assigned Lucy Gray, the female tribute from District 12. I was very curious to see what this book was going to be about, considering that it was about snow. I think that was like the last thing that a lot of us were thinking that Suzanne Collins was going to write about. And what I'll say is that it was definitely interesting. Do I think it was necessary to the canon of the Hunger Games? Yes, with an asterisk. Like, I don't think necessarily anything in the book was that revolutionary or opened my mind that much about anything in the Hunger Games, or it said anything that the Hunger Games didn't already say, or at least hint at. But I do think that the book was overall a net positive in terms of bringing these discussions back to the forefront. It was definitely interesting being inside Snow's head. You really saw how calculated he was. Like, that is the best term to describe him. Like, every single action and choice he makes has a very distinct intention and desired outcome from him in a way that is not at all normal and very much manipulative. The book also shows just how warped the perspective of the capital is and how they view the districts. Like, they put these tributes in farms and they get a vet to treat them instead of a doctor because they truly dehumanize them to the highest extent. You see the lines of thinking that they use to justify their subjugation of the districts and how they even justified the Hunger Games in the first place. On that note, a big portion of the story is about how they make the Hunger Games palatable to a wider audience, because the Hunger Games that we see in this story is not the Hunger Games that we see in the Hunger Games trilogy. They were so much more brutal and unpolished. Not that the Hunger Games in the original trilogy were not brutal, but you could see how 70 years later they turn it into a show, whereas here it is really difficult to watch. A big part of the story is Lucy Gray, who is the tribute that Snow mentors from District 12, and she's part of a group called the Covey, who are a more nomadic group of musicians. And through her story, we get a lot more detail into the role that music plays in this series, this franchise. We obviously saw in the original trilogy The Hanging Tree, as well as The Deep in the Meadow Lullaby, and we get to see more of the origins of those songs, as well as even more songs, and how music plays a part of that culture in District 12. I think if you love The Hunger Games, then you should definitely read this because of all those Easter eggs, of seeing the different details that eventually influenced how things were in the Hunger Games trilogy. Again, was it necessary? I don't know for sure, but did I appreciate some of the things we got? Definitely. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. So those are all the books that I've had today. Please let me know if you read any of them, your thoughts, your opinions, if you're interested in reading any of them. And also let me know a book that you're currently reading. If you like my content, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.